Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. You had to get up early this morning. When you're retired like me, getting up early is hard sometimes. First thing I want to do this morning, which is the most important thing, is thank Kurt for setting this thing all up. I'm old school, and I would normally do a whiteboard and just write things on it or whatever. So he's done all this, put it all together, and I really appreciate his help this morning. I hope things go well. This is the first time I've done this way. I like to work off the crowd, and since I don't know where you are or what you're doing, it's a little harder for us, but we'll get through it. The second thing I want to say before we get started into the whole program is I don't normally like to use the word I much when I talk, but I will, because in birding, the birds don't read the same books we do. And so for us there's no hard and fast rules for the things that we want to talk about. And so this is 60 years worth of experience that I'm going to try to condense down into about an hour. And so we'll work through that and see what we can do together, and we'll just wander through this thing. So what's the big idea with birding? It's the fastest growing non-competitive outdoor activity in the world today. Actually, they've started doing some competition kinds of things in birding, which has been an interesting approach. But basically, it's non-competitive. It's something that you do on your own. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. In the US right now, there's approximately 80 million people. About 30% of the people do some sort of birding, either putting up feeders or just looking out their windows and seeing what they can see out their windows. The pandemic, and one of the reasons I called this the pandemic bird talk, is that because of what's going on in the pandemic and people are at home so much, there's been a 40% increase since the start of the pandemic. People are locked in their homes, as you may be, and just need something to do. And so birding has really picked up in the last 6 or 8 months. And the best place for you to start birding, if you're not birding, it's a good time to begin. If you are birding, it's a good time to increase what you've been doing a little bit. So we're going to go through that and see what's going on with all this birding stuff. It's a great challenge. I've been doing this for over 60 years, off and on. And what I find is every day I learn something new when I go out in the field, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for whatever age level that you're dealing with, it's a great challenge. It's something new. If you haven't been birding, it's an opportunity to learn something new. There's a lot of interesting things about birding, and it doesn't just have to be birding. If you're looking outside, you'll see other wildlife in your yards. And one of the things that makes birding interesting, it's very inexpensive and it's safe. You need two things. Well, I recommend two things. There's that I word. I recommend two things. And first of all is a pair of binoculars. And I always get this question, what should I buy? When you go buy a pair of binoculars, or maybe you have some, there's only two things that I look at. One is if you look on the back, it'll give you a number and it'll say 7 by 35. Always make sure that second number is 5 times greater than the first number. The ones that I use are made by Nikon, and they're 842. So the second number is how much light comes in, and that's really important if you're out birding. The other question I get is, which one should I buy? My recommendation is buy the best that you can afford. If you can afford a $50 pair of binoculars, that's what you buy. If binoculars range from $20 up to $2,000 or $3,000, I find that anything over a couple $100 isn't worth spending the extra money on. I'm sure the people that sell binoculars wouldn't want me to say that, but that's the truth. The best places to get binoculars, Bass Pro Shop, Cabela's, some places like that have really good selections of binoculars, and you can buy them fairly reasonably there. And look through them before you buy them. Just don't buy something and take it home and not look through it, but look through it and pick out something that you really like. The second thing that you'll need, I'm going to reach across here, is a book. So you can identify what you're looking at. The important thing in buying a book for birding is to make sure it says Eastern United States. If you can read that, it says east of the Rockies, backyard birds of the Southwest, and this one is Eastern North America. If you buy one that's just the birds of North America, you end up with something like this, and it gets way too confusing. So look for something that says Eastern United States or Eastern North America. That'll make it a lot easier for you. I find this little sibling one, which is just a handout kind of thing. It's laminated. You can carry it, put it in your pocket. Birds of the Southeast. It's very handy when you're walking around. So the pandemic, since you're locked up in your house, you can bird out of your backyard. You bird in your backyard, and you don't even have to go outside. And you bird from home. And one of the things I like to talk to people about is that if you're homeschooling, if you have young kids and you're homeschooling, it's a new thing for them probably to get involved with. There's a lot of, you can talk about habitats, you can talk about food, lots of things you can talk about to get them away from the computer for a little bit, have them look outside, have them walk outside, spend some time away from their computers and their games so they can do something a little different. There's a whole new learning thing when you get into birding about, again, about habitats, about flight patterns, all kind of migration. There's lots of things that you can talk about. So birding from home is really kind of an interesting thing. The other thing about birding from home is you never have to go outside. If it's a cold, windy day, you just stand and look out your window with your cup of coffee, and you can just bird right from there. And I have a lot of feeders out, and I can sit in the morning and drink my coffee and look out and see my 6 or 7 feeders that I have out. And I'll get 20, 25 species of birds coming in the mornings. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. Outside alone, if you need to get outside, birding can be done alone. You don't have to go with a group. We'll talk about small groups in a minute, but you can go out and walk in the woods someplace. A lot of the state parks or the county parks, the city parks, right here, not too far from Logan's, is Fletcher Park. And they actually have a bird walk there on Friday morning, some Friday mornings. And so you can maybe catch that if you're going to do a small group. So birding alone is good. You got to have your book with you so you can know what you're seeing. If you want to do a small group, we'll talk right at the end about some groups that are meeting and places that you could possibly go to meet with small groups. The groups that I lead, we all wear masks, we stay distance, so it's a relatively safe thing. The next thing you see on your screen is AAA. I have no idea why I put that in there. If you can figure out what that's there for, please text me and let me know what that's there. I went through my slides. I did this over the holidays, put this together, and then went back and reviewed it a couple of days ago. And I saw that at AAA. I have no idea why I put that in there. So that there may be some frustrations. I know that's part of it. Again, I don't know. It's just one of those type of things, I guess. There may be some frustrations if you're new to birding. And that's the reasons you want a book that's Eastern United States, because the birds on the West Coast and then Central America, Central United States, they're different than they are here on the East Coast. And so you don't want to get too confused with that. The frustration comes in that you see something, you don't know what it is. You have to use the book or use something to find out what it is. The other thing that's available for you for free, there are at least 3 apps that you can use. One of them is called Merlin. Merlin is a falcon. These are free apps, and it'll guide you through trying to identify whatever bird that you see. There's one that's put out by Audubon that's very good. It has an extensive list of birds. Doesn't help you so much in identifying like the Merlin does. The other one is called eBird. And eBird is primarily a listing app. So as you are doing your birding, you can go in there and type in or go in and just point, and it'll show you, it'll keep a list for you of what you've seen. So there's some apps that are available if you don't like to use books that I would challenge you or would recommend that you get a book. Birding for me, and again, it's a great challenge. The thing that I do about birding, for me, it's a game. It's like golf. I keep score. I go out 2 or 3 times a week, and I keep a list of everything that I see, and I challenge myself. How many can I see today? What can I see today? How many can I see? So I go to different places, bird alone, and keep a list of what I see. So making your backyard more bird friendly, and this is good if you're just going to bird in your backyard. There's 3 basic needs that you should have. That's food, and we'll talk about food, water, and shelter. So 3 basic needs: food, water, and shelter. Feeder types. I have about 7 feeders in my yard. I go through a lot of feed, but I also draw in a lot of birds, so I don't have to go outside. I can just sit and drink my coffee and do that. My favorite feeder is a platform feeder. I don't have one to show you this morning, but it's basically, it's just a feeder that's flat with some sides on it so the seeds don't fall out. And I keep a dome over mine so that the seed doesn't get rained on. And there would be times where I'll have 12 or 15 birds at one time sitting on that platform feeder. They like to come and share together. If you don't have any feeders and you're looking to get started, I would recommend starting with a tube feeder. This is a tube feeder. You just simply pour the feed in the top, hang it someplace, and the birds come in and land, and you'll fill this up if you have a lot of activity, probably once a day. The thing I'll say about Logan's right now, this is a commercial break, is they probably have the best selection of feeders, feed, and bird paraphernalia anywhere I've seen in the East. I've go to a lot of places, and their selection, particularly of food, is just phenomenal. They have everything that you could possibly need for food, and feeders. A hopper feeder is simply a feeder with plexiglass sides that you open the top and you pour the stuff in. And I won't kid you, some of these things, you know, they're, especially if you're sitting home and you're not working or you're working from home, they're going to cost you something. It's not terribly expensive, but you're going to have to do some investment if you don't have a feeder. If you are limited on your funds, do this. This is a soot feeder, and this is soot that goes inside the feeder. If nothing else, get this. This is for under $10. You can hang this outside, and it'll attract all kinds of birds, and it's very inexpensive. There are some feeders now that are electric, so if squirrels get on it, it spins the squirrels off. You have to come in to Logan's and look at the video on that, and they get quite expensive, but it's just what you can afford. Again, it's like the binoculars. It's whatever you can afford. Put a couple different feeders up, and we'll talk about some different kinds of food that you put in them to draw different things in. So soot feeder is a good buy if you have some issues that you can't afford to buy better feeders, tube feeders, platform feeders, other kinds of feeders like that. One of the things that I would say that, if you have children at home that are school age and you need something to do, is that you can spend some time building your own feeders, building your own bird houses. That's another project that you can get to away from the computer so they can have something to do. Okay, food types. Sunflower seeds, I call it Boss, and that's black oil sunflower seeds, and they look like this. I go through probably 25, 30 pounds of this a month. It's not very, sunflower seeds aren't very expensive. It's probably the least expensive food that you can get. The only problem it's not a problem, but what happens with black oil sunflower seeds is that they crack those seed open and then they throw the shell of the seed on the ground. So you end up with a pile of seed shells on the ground underneath the feeder. And it can get a little messy. Cracked corn's good, safflower, peanuts. Niger is simply thistle seed. I would recommend not feeding table scraps that are white flour based, like bread. A lot of people want to put bread out. It's not a good thing, especially if it's dry. Birds will eat that. And then if it gets wet, it expands in their stomach, and it's not good for them. Some products are only West Coast. Only the West Coast birds will eat them. I'm not sure about that, but that's what some of the seed companies are saying, is that if you buy this, that the birds will eat it. There's a product that they put in as a filler called millet. It's a little white BB looking kind of thing. And if you go to the big box stores and buy their seed, you're going to get a lot of filler. I would recommend spending a little extra money and buying good seed. I have been using this product from All Delights. It's called Nut and Berry, and they have a whole skid of it in the building here. Nut and Berry. I've been using this probably for 30 years. It's the best. Has a little bit of sunflower in it, so you get a little bit of residual. But Wild Delights makes another one called Porch and Patio, which has the sunflower seeds are already cracked for the birds, so there's no mess at all. Everything that's in there is used, and if you put it on your patio, it literally there's no mess. This you get a little tiny bit, no filler in these. If you buy a bag and spend money for it at a big box store, half of what you buy is just stuff that the birds won't eat, and they'll just throw it away. Stick it out on the ground, and then it attracts rodents, and you don't want that in your yard. The other thing that you might want to consider putting out are mealworms. I didn't bring any to show you this morning. There's little mealworms. They're freeze dried here. You can put a little olive oil on them, some salt, and put them in the microwave, and they're good for snacks. No, I'm just kidding. That's the hard part about doing this, is I like to put in some of that kind of stuff, and there's nobody to laugh. Mealworms are particularly good for bluebirds. If you put out a little feeder with mealworms in it, should draw bluebirds in if they're in their area. So that's the types of food you can get. Logan's has their own special blend, which is very good. It's part sunflower, part safflower, has some peanuts in it, and they do a really good special on that. It's their own blend, and it's a really good product. So be sure to come and look at that also. Water, got to have water out. You can do bird bath, which is very nice. They sell those, another commercial, they sell those here at Logan's. They sell fountains here, and they sell ponds. But you can, if you don't want to invest in that, or you don't have something to put up right away, you can use anything, just a pan of some sort. But you need to have water out. This time of year, it's harder because it wants to freeze. But if you keep it moving, or you just make sure that you dump it every day, put fresh water in, it's good. There are some drips that you can put out. It's a little product with like a little fountain that drips the water, and some of the birds really like dripped water. And keep it moving if you can, and for two reasons. First of all, in the summertime, if you have bird baths, if you keep it moving, it helps keep the mosquito larvae down. And then again, you can make your own. One of the things that we use is terracotta pots. Put two pots together and then put a tray on top of it, and you can put water in that. So water, got to have water out there for the birds. They really like it. Shelter, plant things with berries. You have to be careful when you do this, because some berries are poisonous to birds. Don't plant nandina. Nandina that has nice, beautiful red berries on it, but it's poisonous to birds, and they won't eat it. Or if they do eat it, it's not very healthy for them. So plants do two things: plant things with berries, and it also serves as a cover. If you have trees in your yard, and their limbs that are coming down, don't burn them, don't throw them away. Make a little brush pile someplace in your yard, because a lot of the birds will like to play in that brush pile, and it's a good shelter for them. What you'll see sometimes, depending on where you live, is that there'll be times that the birds kind of disappear. And if you look up, one of the things I really recommend is, if you're birding, once in a while, look up, because you're going to see flyovers. So flyovers would include things like turkey vultures, black vultures, and a whole list of different kinds of hawks that are in the area. Recently, my feeders out front were swooped by a merlin, which is the smallest, or one of the smallest falcons there is. It's about a robin-sized falcon, but they'll come in and take small sparrows off of feeders. And he came in the yard and was just having a good time. But I had the bushes right next to my feeders. The birds got in that, and then he couldn't get into that. So make a place for them to get in and shelter. Buy some plants that are bushy, where they can get inside and have a lot of protection. If they have berries on them, that's a plus. So with your plants, be diverse. Have a whole bunch of different kinds of plants, different berries, and choose plants that birds like. There are lists of things that are published that birds like. One of the best ones are dogwood trees. They love the seeds on the dogwood trees, or even the buds off the dogwood trees. So get a dogwood tree, put in your yard. There's just lots of different things that you can put there. I have a lot of holly in my yard, lots of beautiful red berries on it right now. And plant lots. You can start small, but put different kinds of things in, and put a lot in if you can. And don't worry, be messy. Your neighbors won't fuss with you that much. Put things in. If your neighbors fuss with you, plant it so you can't see their house. That was another one of those joke things that you're supposed to laugh at. Okay, what might we see? I'm going to spend most of the time today talking about and showing you pictures of birds that you'll see in your yard. If you're birding worldwide, you can see up to 10,000 species. In North America, 900 species. In North Carolina, there's been documented 473 species. In Wake County, 431. Most of the species in Wake County have been seen up around Falls Lake. The problem with Falls Lake is that there's 250 miles of shoreline. and it's hard to determine where to go. I'm on a couple websites that every day I get lists of birds, rare birds in the area. And so I've become what's known as a chaser. When I get a sighting, if it's someplace halfway close, I can get my car and go there and look for this thing. And that's kind of fun. Again, that's part of my listing kind of thing. My wife encouraged, because of the pandemic and because we're both retired and she needs to get me out of the house, and she's not a birder, she's suggested that I do a big year this year. And big year is simply you take a whole year and count how many things that you can see, even if you have to drive to go see them. In North Carolina last year, the person that did the best big year did 355 species, which is just an incredible amount of species to see. You have to stay very busy to see that. In your backyard, and this is you all, you can see 25 or 30 species easy in your backyard, particularly if you're putting out some good seed and suet. Keep the water out there. It's easy to get 25 or 30 species. I've had as many as 20 species in my yard at one time. Other things that you can count and things that we'll look at are mostly things that come to your feeders, and then we'll see that on a slide. But there'll be flyovers. Again, you're going to get probably 8 to 10 species of flyovers, and again, including we have 2 kinds of vultures. There's several hawks in the area, so lots of things like this. I live in the little town of Wendell. That's about 25 miles east of downtown Raleigh. If you haven't been to Wendell, come and visit us. We have some, another commercial. We have some great coffee shops, all kinds of things going on in Wendell. But the second Saturday of every month at 8:30 in the morning, I need to walk at the Wendell Community Park. I've been doing that for 4 years now, and we have documented as a group actually 121 species now. We just got a new one last week. We had a bald eagle in the park last week. So we're at 121 documented species in that park. It's only 118 acres. When we walk about 1.5 miles or maybe 2 miles and take a couple hours to do that. But we're always getting 25, 30 species. We've had as many as 50 species. So if you're looking at some place to get out and get away for a little bit, again, the second Saturday of the month, we all wear masks, we stay distance, but we get out and we have a good time looking for what's out there. That's my commercial for Wendell. Things to look for when you're looking at birds. Look for eye lines. That would be a stripe through the line, through the eye. So the next one says eye ring, which would be a ring, a white ring or a colored ring around the eye, or again, the stripe. Look for wing bars. A lot of birds have 1 or 2 wing bars. Will be a different color than the rest of the bird. Typically white color wing bars. Rump patches. We'll see a bird in a little bit called the yellow-rumped warbler, and they'll have big rump patch. Some of the other birds have patches on their rump that we'll see. What's the color of the breast? Is it different than the rest of the body? Does the breast have streaks or dots? And that's a big clue for a lot of the birds. What's the overall color pattern? Does it have a crown? What's it look like? What's the crown color? Are there stripes on the crown? Does it have a top notch? What's the tail? What's the color of the tail? One of the thrushes, you can only tell by the color of the tail. It's a little different than some of the other ones. What's the shape of the tail? Is it notched? Is it round? Is it square? So that's a big clue for what the bird might be. What's the behavior of the bird? Is it in the water? If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So you have to know behavior. Some of the birds pump their tail. They'll sit and they'll just pump their tail. So that's an indication of what the bird might be. So 60% of all ID is by song or by call. That makes it really difficult if you're new to this whole thing, because some of it's geographic too. I'm from the Midwest originally, and the Carolina wren, which is pretty much nationwide, in the Midwest always sings tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. Doesn't sing anything else. I came to the South a few years ago, and I kept hearing these calls, and it was something different. One of them in my yard now sings Ricky, Ricky, Ricky. They sing hamburger, 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 all kinds of different calls in the South. So you have to be careful about that in ID, but you need to begin to learn what some of the songs are. it'll really help you identify the bird. And as we go through the pictures of the birds, we're going to look at about 30 birds here in a minute. If I remember the calls, I'll shout them out to you. And lastly, in this things to look for, look at the bird, not the book. The reason is you're going to look, say, oh, what's that? You're going to get your book, and by the time you look back, it's gone. So spend time looking at the bird, taking notes mentally if you have to, and then go to the book, because it'll fly away and you won't have a good chance to see whether it has stripes or eye rings or stuff like that. So look at the bird, not the book. Okay, feeders. We'll only look at what might come to your feeder. There's some things that will come to your yard that won't get in your feeder. A robin's a great example. I have lots of robins in my yard, but they never get in the feeder. And you'll probably have others, and they'll ground feed and not come to the feeders. And you'll have flyovers. And again, you'll get 8 or 10 species maybe just in flyovers if you keep looking. So we're going to go through a bunch of birds right now. Hope you identify them so that you don't have that frustration. We'll give you as many clues as we can to help you identify those, and we'll see what we can do. I expect to see lists from y'all. Now, I'm sure you all know what this one is. This is a bluebird. There are only 3 species of bluebirds in the United States. There's a mountain, and there's a western, and then the eastern bluebird. Come on, have a drink of whatever this is. Very blue on the back. It has the rusty color on the chest, and this is the one that likes to eat mealworms. A lot of people put up boxes for bluebirds. They were on an endangered list not too long ago because farmers and golf courses were using a lot of pesticides that would make the eggs infernal or make the shells too soft and the eggs wouldn't hatch. And so they were very threatened for a while. But since those things have been banned, there's been a big comeback of the bluebird. Very pretty bird. It's hard to miss. So anyone with all that really bright blue color like that. I love the blue jay, but we'll see that in a minute. Bluebird. If you're putting boxes up, try to face them slightly southeast so it'll catch the morning sun, 5 or 6 foot off the ground. And it's not a bad idea to put a baffle on them because you could actually have snakes that would try to climb up the pole, whatever pole you have it on, and try to get in and eat the eggs. So you have to be careful about that. Goldfinch. A lot of people call these wild canaries. Goldfinches in the summertime look like this. They have the black on the top of the head. Remember I said to look at head patterns, look for wing bars. This one has the single white wing bar on the black wing. Very pretty. It's hard not to understand what this bird is once you see it. But in the wintertime, it looks like this. And people want to call it all kinds of different things. The wing bars are different. The color's different. And you have to be very careful about identifying goldfinches in the winter. You will have these in your feeders. A lot of people put out the Niger seed, and you have to have a special feeder for that. It has a much smaller hole than the regular feeders. You put out the Niger seed, and it draws more goldfinches in. Cardinals. Everybody knows cardinals. The confusion you can get on cardinals is the female because of the color, but it does have a top notch. There's only, here's a question for you. How many birds have top notches? So you've got the cardinal, you've got the blue jay, and we're going to see one in just a minute called the tufted titmouse, which also has that top knot. Cardinals are very fond of the black oil sunflower seeds, so keep some of that out. This is a platform feeder. I mentioned platform feeders before. Here's a good example of a platform feeder. And you just pour the seed in there, and they come in and sit around and have a good time. Woodpeckers. This is one that you should get in your yard if you have any seed out at all, or even a soot feeder. This was just nominated as one of the 10 worst named birds in the world. This is a red-bellied woodpecker. I'll challenge you, that's that challenge thing. I'll challenge you to find the red on this woodpecker's belly. You can't see it. If you get it right in the sun and the feathers blow away a little bit, you might see it, but it's terribly named. You just don't see the red belly there at all. Should be the red cap. You can't call it the red-headed because there is a red-headed woodpecker, but it could be called the red cap woodpecker. They're looking to change the name. We'll see how that goes. There are 7 common woodpeckers in the area, and 1 not so common the red cockaded, which was on endangered species. The PD National Wildlife Center down near the South Carolina border has some nesting ones there, but not too many of them around. But out of the 7 that are in the area, there are 4 that you could possibly get in your feeders, and this would probably be the most common one. They'll come in, the ones that come to my feeder come in and they'll take a seed and then they fly off to eat it. They don't stay in the feeder. Red-bellied woodpecker. And this is the downy woodpecker. There's another woodpecker that we'll look, the next slide will be the hairy woodpecker, which looks exactly like the downy woodpecker, except for one feature. If you look at the bill on the downy woodpecker, the bill is shorter than the width of the head. And this is a little male downy because of the red on the back of the head. So the bill is shorter than the width of the head. So think dinky, downy. And then if we look at the hairy, huge, hairy, the bill is much longer than the width, equal to or longer than the width of the head. Okay? Huge, hairy, dinky, downy. Other than that, they look the same. The hairy is bigger than the downy, but at a distance, it's hard to tell the size difference. So you have to look for the bill to see the difference. These love suet feeders. They come into the platform feeder. Anything that I have out, I'll see woodpeckers on a lot of the time. This guy was my whole start to birding. This is called the pileated woodpecker. If you've not seen one of these, it's also called the oh my God bird, because when people say it, they go, oh my God, what's that? This woodpecker is at least the size of a crow. And when he hammers on a tree, you'll know that he's there. A beautiful bird, largest woodpecker probably in the United States. There is one we think that's extinct. There's been some possible reportings of the ivory-billed woodpecker, which is bigger, a little bit bigger than the pileated woodpecker, but it hasn't been seen for several years. People keep looking for it. Audubon actually puts out some folks, hires folks just to look for the ivory-billed woodpecker every year. And one of the reasons they became extinct was that they're typically a swamp, live in swamps, and some of the swamps are being drained for whatever reasons. And quite honestly, the bills, since they look like ivory, were used by Native Americans for necklaces. So a lot of them were killed because of that reason. So the ivory-billed, if you see one of those, or if you hear one of those, call me. I'll come a looking. This is the pileated. This was my start. When I was about 12 years old, I was in a group called the Junior Naturalist Program. And on the trees, we had these little soot feeders, just like I showed you before. We had a lot of these attached to trees out in the woods along the trails. And part of my job as a junior naturalist was to go put soot in each one of these things. And one day I was putting soot in one of these little feeders on a tree, and a pileated came right around the tree and met me eye to eye. And again, this bird is crow size. And so that was kind of my start of being interested in birding. It was quite an experience. They will come to your feeders. They'll cause ruckus, but they'll come to your feeders. And they do a lot of ground feeding. If you have rotten stumps in your yard or nearby, they like to feed on insects in rotten stumps. Carolina wren, I mentioned him earlier. And here's a good example of what to look for. The stripe through the eye. I mentioned when we said, what kinds of things do we need to be looking for? The stripe through the eye. The bill is slightly curved. And look at the tail position. The tail's in an upright position. There are 3 or 4 kinds of wrens that you can get here. This is the most common. The other is the winter wren, which I say looks like a golf ball with a tail on it. It's a little smaller, and it's all gray. And then there's the house wren. And those won't come to your feeders. This one comes, and maybe 2 or 3 of them at a time come to your feeders, and really like the smaller seeds in the feeders. Carolina wren. This is the one that, again, I mentioned up north has the tea kettle song. And here in the south, it has a variety of different songs that you have to learn to identify. If you're in the woods or even in your yard and you hear something that's very brash, loud, and then a triplets, da-da-da-da-da-da, 3 kind of notes with a duplet in it, it's probably the Carolina wren. Carolina chickadee. There are 2. Well, there's more than 2 kinds of chickadees, but the 2 that you can confuse are the Carolina and the black cap chickadee. There are no black cap chickadees in this part of the state. If you go up into the mountains, you might see one. They're typically a northern species. You can't almost tell them apart. The only way to really tell them apart is by song, by call. But just know that when most people see this and say, oh, black-capped chickadee, it's not a black-capped chickadee, it's the Carolina chickadee, and their song is simply chickadee dee 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 dee. I can't even make a joke out of that one. And there are lots of these little guys around. And one of the things about black-capped or about Carolina chickadees, if you're out walking in the woods, and you'll see several of them. They love sweet gum trees in the Wendell Park with lots of sweet gum trees, and they're just there a lot. There are typically other species with them, and some of the species that you might want to find. And I need to say something here about the backyard. People think about looking for rare species. I want to see something really rare. Most rare species, I don't want to say most, but a big proportion of rare species are really found in people's backyards. They're not someplace in a national park where you have to go walk for hours or anything. Okay? They're in your feeder. Right now, down in Cary, I'm on a list. I get 20 or 30 notices of different rare birds that are in the area, and I go through those. And down in Cary now, for probably 6 weeks or longer, there's been a varied thrush, which is a West Coast species. It's the West Coast version of the American robin. And it's been there for a long time in a guy's backyard. And it's probably the first time, maybe the second time it's been reported in the state. And it's just hanging out there. And a lot of people have had a chance to go by and see it. So look in your backyard. Don't be quick to name something that's rare. I'm very conservative when it comes to looking at rare birds, but I'll spend time trying to identify them. Carolina chickadee, the black-capped chickadee is a little smaller, and it'll show just a little bit of rusty color underneath that wing. But again, call them Carolinas and you're safe. I mentioned birds with crests. This is the tufted titmouse. My son called me. My son is just starting into birding. And he said, Dad, I've got baby cardinals in my backyard. They're all gray. And I said, are they smaller than the cardinal? He said, yeah. I said, well, no, it's a titmouse because it looks, the shape, the silhouette is the same as the cardinal. But it has that very dark eye. It has the little bit of crest, and it has that little bit of rust right under the wing. Tufted titmouse. Titmouse, and I think it's Swedish. That may be a lie, but I'll stick to that anyway. Means little bird. So this is a tufted little bird, and it's not very big. It's sparrow size. And these will come to your feeder a lot. And there's songs. This is a song that you can learn very quickly. This song is Peter, Peter, Peter. And you'll hear it, Peter, 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 out in the woods, in your backyard, lots of different places you'll hear it. It's very distinct. It doesn't change the song much. The tufted titmouse. Okay, nuthatches. Nuthatches are called, there are 3 of them in the area. We'll look at all 3 of them here, are called upside down birds. And you can see that he's coming down the tree head first, and they always do that. This is the most common of the nuthatches. This is the white-breasted nuthatch. Remember we talked about looking at the head. You see the black across the head with the white. There's no stripe or anything like that. Well, again, a little bird. A lot of these, they're called passeriforms, perching birds are small. The white-breasted, their song is very nasal. It sounds like a kazoo, if you know what kazoo is, when they sing. The white-breasted nuthatch. And this is the red-breasted nuthatch. The red-breasted nuthatch, typically only see them every 3 or 4 years in this part of the country. I actually had one in my feeder about a week ago. I was surprised to see him there. A lot different than the white-breasted. It has the red or the rusty color underneath, has the black stripe through the eye, where on the white-breasted nuthatch, it's all white. And one of the reasons they come south is that you can kind of tell what the winter's going to be like up north because they're looking for food. And if there's a lot of them in the area, you can figure that the Canada is getting a lot of cold weather. There's nothing for them to eat. And so they're coming this far south in order for them to find something to eat. That's the red-breasted. Won't see many of these, but there are a few. There's been more reports this year than other years. So I've been a little worried about the winter. We've had a lot of rain, but not that much cold. So I'm surprised that we've seen so many. There's supposed to be some Arctic blasts going on. And we've seen the Northeast, a lot of bad weather. So maybe they're being pushed down from the Northeast. This is my favorite bird. This is the brown-headed nuthatch. Tiny little bird, probably 3 inches. It definitely has that brown cap, and there's a little white spot right there on the back of the head, the white throat. Very aggressive little for its size. I was filling a feeder, oh, it's been a couple weeks ago, and I used a tin can and was turning the can over like this to pour the feed out, and the brown-headed nuthatch slammed right on the back of my hand. He was that hungry, wanted something to eat right now. Their call sounds like a squeaky toy, like maybe one you get for your dog, or if you have little kids, babies, and you have that little squeaky toy. That's what their call sounds like. That's the brown-headed nuthatch. 3 nuthatches in the area. Sparrows are my nemesis. In this area, you could probably see, if you're really good at birding, probably 6 to 8 different kinds of sparrows. This one is, this time of year is most common. When I pulled up and parked my car this morning, there was about a dozen of these sitting right in the parking lot. This is the white-throated sparrow. You can tell the white underneath the throat, that's where it gets its name, white crown, and it has that little yellow patch right over the eye. Time for another shot. And their song is very easy to identify. They sing, "Poor Sam Peabody, Peabody, Peabody," or "Oh, Canada, Canada, Canada." Don't see them much in the summertime. They're here in the winter. They'll come to your feeder, and they're primarily a ground feeder. So if you have feeders where other birds are kicking seed on the ground, look underneath the feeder, and you may see these underneath your feeders. White-throated sparrows, again, you're going to see, if you're really good at sparrows, and they're a problem for me, 6 to 8 different kinds in this area. The other one that will come to your feeder a lot is a chipping sparrow. Rusty cap. We talked, I said, look at the cap, look at the stripe through the eye. This is the chipping sparrow. And these will come in flocks of, 25 or 30, typically a ground feeder, but will come to your feeders, sit in your feeders. But the big identifying thing here is the white stripe over the black stripe through the eye. Other sparrows in the area include song sparrow, swamp sparrow, Savannah sparrow, and if you go to the coast, then you have a bunch of seaside sparrows. There's just a lot of different sparrows, and they're really hard to identify. But so it's one of those challenge kinds of things that you have to work on. Sometimes when I'm looking at sparrows, I'll spend, a lot of time just on one sparrow looking for the identification marks on that sparrow, so I don't misidentify it. So those are the 2 sparrows I'm going to show you. I think that was all the sparrow, because they're just so hard, and it's something you'll have to work on, and it's more of a intermediate kind of ID kind of thing. Blue jays, when they come to your feeder, they'll just take about everything. The blue jay. Everybody knows what a blue jay looks like. It does have the top notch. This one's not showing it very well. And their call, they have 2 distinct calls. One of them is thief, thief. And the other one you have to be very careful of is they're a great mimicker of the red-shouldered hawk. So if you think you hear a red-shouldered hawk, take a minute and listen for sure, because it may be a blue jay making that imitation. My theory is, for what it's worth, is that they do that to chase other birds away from the feeders so they can get in and eat as much as they want to. They're a very rambunctious bird, very aggressive bird, and you can see that they just take lots of things and run with them. House finches. This is not house sparrow, this is house finch. Different. The house finch is also called the Hollywood finch. Back in about 1928, a lot of people were using these as, they had them in their house, in cages. They were imported. And people, in about 1928, 1930, there was a federal law passed that you couldn't keep wild animals in your house. So everybody that had house finches, including pet stores, released them. They were primarily on the West Coast, Hollywood. That's where they started. But then there was a lot of them on the East Coast. New York started them, and they released them, and now they're everywhere. They're just everywhere. It's an attractive little bird. And we're looking at another bird that looks very similar to it in a minute, and I'll tell you how to tell them apart. Has this beautiful red color, and if you saw the back of this bird, you'll see some red too. The female, which is on the right-hand side, can be confused with a sparrow. Has stripes, it's just brown, and sometimes it's kind of hard to identify, except you see all that brown striping on it. The house finch. Now, there's a purple finch also. The one on the right is the house finch. And look at the red. It's really red and has a little red on the tail there, or just above the tail. The one on the left is the purple finch. The difference is the purple finch is raspberry color and the house finch is red. Now, you have to have pretty good eyes to tell the difference there. But the female purple finch does look a lot different than the female house finch. And I really get a good feeling for that I have a purple finch when I see the female. I don't have a picture of the female. She was pretty shy. She didn't want to show herself. But look in your book and you'll see the picture of the female purple finch there. Purple finch is raspberry, house finch is red. You'll get a few purple finches. Again, they're kind of like the red-breasted nuthatch. They come down not necessarily every year, but off and on. And so you can't get them in your feeders. There's a whole group of birds that come through in the spring and the fall and the migration called warblers. There are two that stay around a lot in the wintertime. This is the yellow rumped warbler. It used to be called the myrtle warbler. Look at the rump, yellow rump. Some of them call them butterballs. It has a little yellow under the wings also. The yellow rumped warbler. In the spring, there are days where you might see 20 different species of warblers, if you know what you're looking for. So when they come through in hordes and lots of different species. In the spring, they're very easy to tell apart. If you look in the book, there's actually a section in there that says confusing fall warblers. So they change their color completely in the fall and winter. So identification becomes much, much harder this time of year. The other warblers you get, and these are in my feeders all the time, are the little pine warblers. Yellow bird, 2 white wing bars, and stripes on the chest. And that's how you tell them apart from the goldfinches, is they don't have the black on top of the head. And they have those little, you can see the little dark stripes there on the breast of the bird. The pine warbler. The interesting thing about the pine warbler is we looked at the chipping sparrow a little bit ago. The chipping sparrow and the pine warbler songs are almost identical. It takes a good ear to differentiate the two. So you have to be careful if you're out and you're identifying by song. Those two songs are very similar. This is called a pine siskin. It's one of the 3 birds. We looked at the red-breasted nuthatch, the purple finch, and now the pine siskin that are influenced primarily by winter in the north. Pine siskin is a beautiful little bird, tiny little bird, about 3-4 inches, maybe not that big. Shows that yellow on the feathers there. And when they come to your feeders, they'll come in. I just talked to a lady this week that said she had 50 of them in her yard at one time. They were all on their feeders. They'll come in and just take everything. It's like locusts going through a wheat field. They'll just come in and eat everything it's in your yard. Mourning dove, and it's MOU, which means sad, not mourning like in AM. And the reason they call them that is because of the song that they sing. It's very mournful. And when you hear them, the coo song, it's pretty obvious. But when you hear them fly, the noise that you hear is by the wings. And here's a bit of trivia for you. If you watch mourning doves, and a lot of birds on the ground when they walk, I've lost myself here, Kurt. My picture's not there anymore. Your name's there. Anyway, I can't show you because, oh, there it is. Hi. When they walk, they move their head like this. You see ducks doing that too. It's because their eyes are on the sides of their heads, and when they look, they can only see in 2 dimensions. And so by moving their heads more, it actually helps them pick up that 3rd dimension for depth perception. Mourning dove. There's another dove. Do I have the picture of? No, that's a robin. Everybody knows a robin. The other dove that we get here is called the rock dove, that you all know as a pigeon. Probably won't come to your yard, but you see them a lot of times under underpasses on the freeway and places like that. Robins typically won't come to your feeder. They'll maybe feed on the ground underneath of it, but they're primarily carnivorous. They're worm eaters, and they'll dig around the yard for worms. But I use this one for the example of the eye ring. And this is called a broken eye ring. It's not a complete eye ring. So if you take a look at that, that's one of the things I wanted to show you with this one. In the spring, starting about April, mid-April, put out hummingbird feeders. This is the ruby-throated hummingbird. We'll get, typically this is only the one that we get. There are a couple other ones that may come through, the rufus and the Anna, but there are about 30 species of hummingbirds, and we only get 1 or 2 here. Just an absolutely beautiful kind of bird. And you put out the feeders, you put sugar water in it, and you'll attract lots of hummingbirds to your feeder. And they love red flowers. So if you're planting things in your yard, plant red flowers, and you'll draw the hummingbirds in. This is an interesting bird. This is called the brown-headed cowbird, obvious by the name. The thing that's interesting about the cowbird is that if you have feeders up, even bluebird feeders, they'll lay their eggs in a feeder or in a nest and then abandon them. And whatever nest or house they put them in, that bird has to raise the babies. Most of the time, they're bigger, and they'll maybe kill the other fledglings that are in there. So cowbirds are an interesting bird to look at, but they're not very nice to other birds. They'll come in flocks. I've seen a lot of them this winter. In fact, I had there's that I word again. I had a group of probably 50 or 60 of them in my backyard just last week. There's a joke there, but I won't use it. This is the other one that, my gosh, I've had grackles in my yard forever, hundreds at a time. They're coming through, and they just riddle my feeder, just take everything that's in my feeder. On the East Coast, you'll have a couple other kinds of blackbirds that look like this, the boat-tail grackle, and there's some other ones, but this is the one that's common here. Very noisy, very large, and they'll come in and just, again, it's one that will destroy your feeders. I shoo them out as much as I can. That's terrible, but I do. Look at the eye here, bright yellow eye. This is when I get a call about this bird a lot. I've got this strange bird in my yard that's got all these spots and polka dots, and it's purple and blue. This is just a European starling. And if you're confused about the starling, there are a lot of color on this bird. If you're confused about it, there's one thing that you look at, and that's the bill. Look at that bill. It's bright yellow. So if you're looking at blackbirds, and there's 2 or 3 different kinds of blackbirds you get here, the cowbird, the grackle, the starling, some other ones, look for the bill. That's the one with the big bright yellow bill. These are basically just nuisance birds, but there's lots of them around. This is another winter bird. This is the slate-colored junco, or just junco. When it flies, it shows white outer tail feathers, and the giveaway here is the bill, white to pinkish bill. And they'll come to your feeder. They're ground feeders also, hang out under your feeders, and they come in large flocks. I said there were 3 birds coming from the north. This is a northern. You'll tell when winter's coming because you'll start having juncos in your yard. Very pretty, bright black eye, a little white under the breast, the junco. Mockingbird. Typically don't see mockingbirds in feeders, but recently I've had one that's come into my feeder a lot. It's a big bird. It's robin size. If you don't know the mockingbird when it flies, it shows some interesting patterns on the wings. Big gray bird. They sing a lot. They'll sing at night. They're kind of a nuisance bird. The mockingbird is one of the 3 mimics that we have. They have about 2,000 calls, so there's no way that you can really identify it by its call other than just listen for the variation. And when it sings, it's very lyrical. It sings and sings a lot of different songs at one time. And this is the brown thrasher. And the reason I put that in, it's a ground feeder, probably won't come to your feeder. It's a big bird, very rusty, all the stripes, but it's a mimic also. And the uniqueness of the brown thrasher is that it has about 3,000 calls. And what it does is you can easily identify it because whatever it sings, it repeats itself. So if it sings la-di-da, then it sings la-di-da the second time, or third time, or fourth time. So if you're listening and trying to identify mimics by calls, listen for the repeating of the lyric. The Mockingbird doesn't repeat, and the brown thrasher does. And then the third mimic we have in the area is the catbird. Catbird migrates through very quickly usually. It's called the black cap or gray cap catbird. I can't talk anymore. And it literally is a mimic, but it mews like a cat in between its calls. And it's very distinct when it does that. It has the rusty color on the tail, the black tail feathers, and the black cap. There are times you'll go months and not see them, but when they migrate through, they're very common, and you might see 10 or 15 in a spot. Again, all three of these birds are large, robin-sized birds. This is the Rufous towhee, or just towhee, bright red eye. Some people kind of confuse this with a robin, but it has the white where the robin has the rusty color or red color. The interesting thing about this is a song that I want you to learn. The towhee, it's a ground feeder, be under your shrubs, won't come to your feeder, but his song is drink your tea, drink your tea. I know you've heard that song, so listen for that. And this is the towhee. Okay, if you want to get out and do something different and not just sit at home, there are 3 places that I know. Actually, there's 4. I'll add another one here in a minute. Lake Crabtree, and I'm not sure they're still doing this. The first Saturday of the month at 8:30, they have a walk. I do the Wendell Community Park walk on the 2nd Saturday of the month. The 4th Saturday of the month, they have a walk in Wake Forest. Theirs starts at 8 o'clock. And if you need to know about those walks, there's a program, or there's a website you can go to called Meetup, and these are posted on Meetup. Occasionally, and I don't know when she does it, but Earl Biggle does a walk at Fletcher Park, which is just a half a mile from the Logan's here or so. And they get a lot of good species right there, and it's right downtown. So there are some areas for you to go to be able to see some things, maybe to bird with other people, to do some learning. Thank you. Keep your mask on, wash your hands, and happy birding to you all.